and welcome back to the Undeserving podcast, where today two Christians talk about, well, something that's probably going to get us in trouble with a lot of other Christians. I'm Josh.
I'm Bryan.
And today we're going to tackle a form of artistry, or multiple forms of artistry.
Well, hold on, let me stop you right there, Josh. I just really quickly wanted to tell you, because you said artistry, you reminded me of something. So I'm thinking about making a movie.
Yeah.
Alright? So just hear me out, alright? So I was thinking, and this is just a script, alright? I don't have a production team or anything, so it's probably going to be pretty low budget. But I was thinking what we do is this. Make a movie about Christians showing atheists who are boss and showing them why they're wrong. And also, maybe throw in a little sad scene here and there. What do you think?
That sounds like every Christian movie ever.
Oh, okay.
Every Christian movie ever.
Okay.
That's right. Today we are talking Christian media and why so much of it is terrible.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, and lots of Christians will even readily admit to this, but don't seem to have an issue for it, the Christian movies, and yes, even the occasional Christian video game that somehow releases, just have this reputation for being heavy-handed and awful.
Yeah.
I don't really know what else to say about it. I would say it's a trope for sure. It's definitely true, I'd say, like 90% of the time.
Honestly, like, as a Christian, it's embarrassing.
It is. It really is.
I see, like, one of my favorite video game channels just did a ranking of the worst Christian they didn't even say the worst, they said the weirdest Christian video games. There was like 20 of them, and I was just like, this is, like, honestly embarrassing. And it doesn't relay the gospel message at all. Yeah.
Like, not very well anyway.
No.
But so, yeah. Why do you think it's this? Why do you think this happens to be an issue, though? Like, you would think that by now Christians would have figured out how to make a decent movie. And I'm not saying there aren't any decent Christian movies, or that there aren't any that are really, really good, but the majority of them still just are not great.
I think, for one could be low budget. Although I'm not going to let that be an excuse, because there's a Christian show that's going on right now called Chosen, and it's excellent, and it has an extremely low, it has a kickstarting budget. Like, literally everything they do for the show is
Kickstarter.
Yeah, it's made by people who donate. So
it definitely doesn't have a multi-million-dollar studio budget.
No, it's a low budget, but it's extremely well done. It's about the life of Christ, like, in chronological order.
Okay.
And it's well made. I would say, like, the camera work is not great sometimes, but it can be a little shaky. But the acting is phenomenal. You actually feel like this is, when you watch Jesus' character, you're like, wow, this, like, feels like who Jesus is.
Right.
And it's really well made. And that's honestly probably the only Christian show or movie, like, I could ever recommend to anybody, because honestly, like, every other one, maybe, like, some are, like, okay, but they're just terrible.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons too is because probably, and I don't know 100% sure if this is the case, but what they're probably trying to do is relay the Christian gospel message, but at the same time they don't want to offend people, and they actually want their thing to get published.
Right.
So they can't, like, flat out say things that are calling out what are culturally acceptable, which Christians would say is sin, right?
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, that's just me. Like, that's just my theory.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't know if this is the right word for it, so correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of it's more like pushing Christian propaganda than actually making a decent movie.
Yeah, you're right. I mean,
like there are so many times where they could have scenes that go one way, but I feel like the choice is made. Oh, we gotta force the gospel in at this exact moment and have this character become a Christian right at this exact moment. And
yeah.
I feel like
there's no subtlety.
Yeah, it's not subtle. It's not done artistically. It's corny.
Yeah, I think like there's just this might also be a thing too. I think there's a lot of Christians who mean well and are passionate and want to get the gospel message out there, but they don't know how to make a movie.
Right.
And they just have no experience in that. So like, I don't know, like, and I think maybe a big thing too is like we're just now getting to a point in Christianity, and no, this isn't progressive. This is just like actually real. Like this. It's not unbiblical, but like I think we're reaching a point in Christianity too, which is true. Where for so long we've gotten to a point where like we've condemned like artistry in any way whatsoever. Like I understand that to an extent, but like making music as a Christian and having talent as a Christian in music isn't wrong. Like having talent in film as a Christian isn't wrong.
Right.
Having expertise in like making like video games and stuff isn't wrong. But that's very new, because it was condemned for such a long time, which is stupid. Well,
even back when I first became a Christian in, like, the early 2010s, like, I remember my foster dad, he was very much like, hey, we are not going to listen to any music that is not exclusively Christian. So, like, it didn't matter if it was a guy who was a Christian himself and just decided he didn't want to make Christian music. Like, you know, I felt like he didn't condemn them, but because their music wasn't explicitly Christian, he was like, we're just not going to listen to it. Mm. And I feel like that's an attitude that a lot of churches or people have taken up across all forms of media. Or almost to the point where it's like, you can do that music or you can make that type of movie if you're a Christian, but, you know, we're going to scold you a little bit for it.
Yeah. No, and you're right. I do think there is a rise, hopefully, of like people who are Christians who are realizing that everything I do that's not sinful can be for the glory of God.
Yeah.
And like I do really hope that there are people who have talents, like who are Christians who have talents in filmmaking, and who have talents in music, like video game making, whatever it could be, like that they would have like an opportunity to show off their talent. And like with the rise of like indie development coming up like in video games, like indie games are starting to take off a lot.
Right.
There's like one to like 5, maybe 10 people development teams that aren't professional making video games. And like there's been some good ones. Undertale is made by one person.
Yeah.
So I do think like there is potential there in the video game market for someone to properly relay the gospel message in like an enjoyable format, right?
Right.
And there is one example I can think of. It's not like flat out like Christian, but like the people who made it were Christian and there are Christian themes in it. But there's a game that this couple made. It's a very abstract game, and it's definitely indie, but it's called That Dragon Cancer, and it's about this Christian couple who lost their child due to cancer, and like it's just like that. Basically, it's an interactive movie of the experiences they had with their kid before he passed away.
Right.
And it is a Christian game. Like it's technically a Christian game, but it's not like overtly Christian.
Right.
So like, but it's a start, right? And I do think like if more Christians would take authority over, would take advantage over like the resources that we have, like we could start to see a rise in actually good Christian video games and maybe even good Christian films. Now I do think a problem is that the media does not want to give Christians a foothold in anything entertainment related, because that would give us an advantage.
Oh, that's easily a big part of it. That is easily a big part of it. But like I said, I think that's it is just a part of it, and I think a lot of it has to do with, and like maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but you know, the Bible says everything we do, we need to give it our best effort. And when you look at a lot of Christian media, it just does not look like the best effort that could have been given.
Sure. And, you know, quite possibly, too, is those people could be talented in filmmaking, but maybe they have a crappy hold of doctrine, or, like, they just don't know the Bible very well.
And not even that, but like I said, like, not to sound like I'm repeating it, but I think the big thing is, like, we let preaching the gospel and, like, shoehorning it absolutely into everything, get ahead of like actually finding a decent way to convey it.
Yeah, and I think a really strong thing that's part of filmmaking that we could take advantage of is allegory.
Right.
Which, like, the Chronicles of Narnia attempt to do that. And the Chronicles of Narnia are decent movies. They're not, I don't think they're great, but they were okay. But I think they do allegory very well.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing that, and this isn't a movie or a video game, but for a class I had to read like a graphic novel. It's kind of a graphic novel. It was called Cottonmouth and the River. And they didn't tell you anything about the book beforehand. Like, it didn't indicate that it was a Christian book whatsoever. But I finished reading it, and it was a fictional story, like 100% fictional. But I finished it, and I was like, oh my gosh, that entire book was an allegory for the gospel.
Yeah.
And it was 100. I did some research. The guy who wrote it was a pastor. It's like, this was the gospel message, but it wasn't on the surface. Like, it was a figurative meaning. And like that's incredibly smart, because it kept my attention. It was good, and it didn't. I don't want to be careful how I say this, but it didn't shove like it wouldn't have shoved Christianity in your face. But like, once you actually start to realize what it's saying, it's like, oh wait, this is the gospel.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the thing. A lot of Christian media companies need to start realizing is that if you're going to make a movie that presents the gospel, or you want it to present the gospel, you have to find a way to do it really well, because if you also make it very clear that it's just straight up a Christian movie and that, that's all it's going to be, most Christians aren't going to go watch it. Like, and people hate me when I say this because, I disagree with them on it, but I'm sorry, God's Not Dead was not a good movie.
No, it wasn't. It was terrible.
And
it was so corny too.
Well, it was, and like, I think the worst part in that whole movie is you had this build up where the kid was having these theological, scientific debates with his professor, and those were going really well. And then, like, out of nowhere, you have this scene where the professor suddenly is thinking about it and gets hit by a car. And he's, like, dying, and out of nowhere, the campus pastor comes up, and he's like, oh, you're dying. Do you want to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And he's like, yes. And then he dies, and I'm just kind of like, really?
Dude, like, he might have gone to hell, bro. Like,
you guys just straight up shoehorned that in like 2 minutes? Like, you couldn't have given that any more of a decent build-up or done that a better way?
I mean, also, like, he didn't even share the gospel with him. That wasn't the gospel.
Yeah.
Like, he said, oh, accept Jesus into your heart. Like, dude, there's no guarantee you're going to heaven.
Right.
Like,
yeah, and, like, maybe... I don't remember the exact wording of the scene because it's been so long since I've seen it. I just remember, and I think most people would agree with me, that scene was just super rushed and kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You can't let a message get in the way of doing things well. And I think this is a conversation you and I have had before, or I've had it with somebody about how the difference between like Christian artists who go out of their way to put Jesus' name like into every song, as opposed to the Christian bands who write songs well and find ways to get the gospel into some of their songs.
Like Wolves at the Gate.
Wolves at the Gate is fantastic. Or, like, not even that, but, like, I've listened to Christian pop-punk bands for a long time now, and there are some that, like, will literally, like, mention Jesus in every verse, and it's like, it's not bad, I get what you're trying to do, but it's just not done well. You're forcing it in instead of letting the art actually show through. Mm. Unlike the Relient K, who I feel like have always been really good at referring to Christ in their music, but like without actually mentioning Christ in a lot of that. Mm. Like some of their older songs, they did that, and it was that old Relient K wasn't that great. But like then you got to like the era. Like, that was the name of the album, in case you were wondering.
Okay. Yeah.
And,
yeah.
They got better with it. They started adding lyrics like you, but, like, if you look at, like, capital Y, and it's like, when I got tired of running from you, I stopped right here to catch my breath. Mm-hmm. And it was your words that drawed me in and said, I miss you, son, will you come home? Like, stuff like that's so much better than, Jesus saved me, guitar solo, yeah, it's like... Like, I appreciate the message they're trying to get across when they do it that way, but it's not done in a way that's going to appeal to people.
Yeah. And I think to an extent, too, is like we shouldn't expect we shouldn't expect entertainment to evangelize. Sure, can it lead someone to Christ? Yeah. No, for sure, absolutely. But let's be real, like, there's not a lot of secular people that watch Christian movies or play Christian video games.
Yeah.
Or listen to Christian music.
And sadly, there's a larger majority of people who refuse to listen to Christian movies and music and anything because it's explicitly Christian. So it's really something that I feel like in the long run could end up hurting the Christian community as far as like an outreach standpoint.
Perhaps.
I feel like the other reason why a lot of Christian media isn't great is because a lot of the ideas aren't original.
No, they aren't. Not at all.
Yeah, like we're not, and once again it comes back to that whole, do your best and like really give it your best effort for Christ. It's literally like, oh, let's just take this game or this movie, slap a Christian skin on it, and resell it.
Yeah, like how about instead of doing that, like, oh, do your best, like how about you show like depict in the movie of someone who's like really struggling, like Christians actually do.
Yeah,
they don't ever show that. Like,
yeah. That's a good point. I feel like Christian movies, the main Christian hero is Christians as we ideally see ourselves all the time, but never as human, or like not even like not as human, but like they don't show the struggles of Christian life, and it just doesn't. It doesn't even it doesn't reverberate with me as a Christian, and it's like, oh, like he's too perfect. Oh, look at Mr. Jesus walking across campus. That's literally what it is half the time.
Yeah. Well, Josh, I think we've dissected a little bit of why these, like as much as we could of why these movies and video games are so bad.
Oh, we didn't even talk about the Noah's Ark Doom clone.
Well, I was gonna say, let's just talk about some of these terrible video games. Like, let's talk about the content and stuff.
Okay, yes.
So, go for it.
Yeah, so let's start with that one. For those of you who don't know what Doom is, Doom was a video game that came out in I think the first game came 90s. Out in like the 90s.
Yeah.
And it was a shooter, and the whole thing was basically that you were a space marine who was stationed on Mars. Somehow a portal to hell was opened up, demons were coming out onto the surface of Mars, and you were basically just killing demons the entire game. It was a great game, it received a lot of awards, it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways too.
It was like pretty much like the first like big FPS.
Yeah, that's first-person shooter for all you non-gamers out there.
Sorry.
But it really created a whole genre, and then a few years later came Noah's Ark. Where basically you played as Noah with a slingshot, and you were running around the different layers of the Ark, shooting rocks at the animals to knock them out so that you could pick them up and put them in their cages. And it was glitchy to begin with, so it didn't even run well half the time. And quite honestly, like, it just, like, personally to me, I find that so against the story of Noah, because the Bible says, like, the animals just showed up, God sent them, they knew what they were there for, like Noah didn't have to chase them down.
You're right.
So like, it's kind of like that. And there's another one, I don't know if you watch him, but there's a channel called The Angry Video Game Nerd.
I've heard of him, yeah.
So he plays a lot of old school games from back in the day, and no, it wasn't The Angry Video Game Nerd, it was JonTron.
Oh, okay,
it was an episode of JonTron. Either way, they both have some language, so be careful if you watch them. But JonTron covered a game, I think it was called like The Amazing Zoo Race.
Oh my gosh, I've heard it. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So the whole premise was that there was this girl making fun of a guy because she was like, you don't read enough scientific textbooks. And he was like, but I don't want to read those books. They're boring. I want to read about fun stuff, like Noah's Ark. And for some reason, they literally all got turned into animals in that office and had to have races. But the subtlety doesn't even stop there. Like, throughout every single course, every so many, like, laps, there are just huge billboards, right, that have, like, Bible verses splattered on them, and, like, you know, it'll be like, repent, death is near, and stuff like that. And there's one course where you, like, crash through this glass, you run over a ramp, there's fireworks, like, Jesus saves, like, it's so out there, but you're playing as this pig running a track in a top hat. It's utter lunacy that people think that this is a good way to evangelize.
They tried, I guess.
Sure, 10 out of 10 for effort, maybe. And, like, I'm not trying to bash anybody. You know, I get that some of these people might have put really, really hard work into these games.
Not hard enough.
Oh, you're making me sound like a jerk. But ultimately, it comes back to that point, like we said, where the effort just wasn't put in to make it. They spent so much time pushing the gospel, they forgot to do everything else well, so you didn't even present the gospel well in the long run. So those are like two really big video games I know about that were kind of a fail.
No, I mean, yeah, I'm with you.
I think there was a video game based off of Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah, I kind of...
And there was a movie based on Pilgrim's Progress. And none of those were great.
No.
Although I heard that's getting a remake, a new movie, so we'll see how that goes.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see that too.
You know, Josh, I love talking about this, but I did want to talk about one other thing before we have to sign off, because this is going to be a foreshadowing to our next episode. But,
so, okay, changing gears. So we're not going to bash Christian media anymore for all you people who might want to get angry at us in the comments.
But since in the future we're going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda's ridiculous timeline.
Right.
We were talking about this the other day, and you brought up a theory with the specific game Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
Right.
Why don't we talk about that a little bit?
So, for anybody who played old school Nintendo 64 and played The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time.
Yeah. Just a disclaimer: Legend of Zelda is one of my favorite series of all time. So
I love it as well. But there was a follow-up to that game that was also fantastic: The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask.
Best game in the series.
And there's a theory that towards the beginning, the hero Link actually dies, and throughout the game, you play as Link, going through the different phases of the afterlife, trying to come to grips with his death, and that's basically it. Like, Link is dead, and you play through Link in the afterlife. So that's the whole theory. I don't know how you feel about it. The video I watched was actually like really, really convincing and kind of compelling, and it's. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if that was how it was, because I think in that split of the timeline, I think that's the last game in that split of the timeline. And even if it's not,
it's actually not.
Okay, so it's not.
No, so that Majora's Mask splits off of like, so that's the direct sequel to like the ending that's actually an Ocarina of Time.
Right.
So like that Link defeats Ganon and Zelda sends it back in time as a kid.
Right.
But after that, I think it's Twilight Princess, and I think there's one more game after that.
Okay.
But
yeah, so, but the reason why a lot of people think this works is because they're like, oh, well, if Link is dead, how could he come back for all the other games? And the thing that a lot of people may not know is that Link isn't the same Link in every game. He's a reincarnation of the spirit of the hero from the Skyward Sword. So, not every single Link is the same Link. Sometimes they're the same from game to game, but a lot of the times it's a different Link.
Now, I want to tell you a theory I heard once, and I don't think it has a lot of credibility to it, but it is an interesting theory. Someone once theorized, I think it was a Reddit post, like people kind of gave him crap for it because like he didn't have very good evidence, but it's interesting to think about. He said that each Legend of Zelda game is actually a retelling of the legend of Link and the Princess and Ganon.
Really?
So, like he would say, like none of these games, like there's no timeline. Like it's just every game is a retelling of the legend in like a different era or whatever. Like so, it's just like kind of passed down and got distorted.
Okay. I mean, that's fair.
I mean, like, it's like, yeah.
I mean, I guess you could think that, but in all fairness, some of the games are just so different that a lot of the elements aren't even the same.
No, yeah, and you're right. That's why I'm... And
like, you know...
Ganon's not even in every game.
Yeah, so, like, you know, you've got the Skyward Sword, but then the next game, chronologically, in the thing is, the Minish Cap. And those two games aren't anything like...
No, not at all.
No, so... It's really interesting. The other thing back to that theory about Link being dead though, there was another thing I forgot to bring up to you.
Was it the grief thing? They're like
so not the grief, not the characters who represented those 5 stages, but actually I think it was either in Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword, I can't remember. But I guess there's a part. No, I can't remember which game it was in, but there's a part where Link goes and meets like it's basically like a skeleton warrior dude, right? And this guy refers to himself as the hero of time who fell at too young of an age. So now everybody's like, oh, that's the Link that died in Majora's Mask, and you know, so because he calls himself the hero of time, you know, that's how everybody referred to him in Ocarina of Time. It's like, you know. So anyway, all that just to say, in the future, we're going to be trying to sort out the Legend of Zelda timeline. And,
I haven't even played every game yet, so...
dude, I give props to people who have played every single game, honestly.
Well, not even... I don't mean like the spin-offs and stuff. I mean like all of the mainline ones. So
right.
Like, I'm like in the middle of Skyward Sword, and that game's rough. Not gonna lie. Like, the controls are just really bad. But, yeah, I'm about to play Wind Waker, which I'm really excited for that.
I loved Wind Waker.
Yeah, but definitely Majora's Mask was my favorite game. Breath of the Wild is probably a close second.
Yeah.
And I mean, Ocarina of Time was, of course, like what started it all. But like, I just thought Majora's Mask was personally a little better. But yeah, I played most of the games. But by the way, and this is something I'm really mad about. I see all these lists like ranking the Legend of Zelda games, and everyone craps on Legend of Zelda 2. That was a good game.
Link's Awakening?
No, not Link's Awakening. It was like The Adventure of Link.
The Adventure of Link, that's right. That's right. Link's Awakening is the one that had the weird whale or something, isn't it?
Yeah, the windfish.
Yeah.
That was a great game. But yeah, people crap all over that game because like, oh, it was like, it just was nothing like the rest of the series. I was like, that's what was so good about it. Like, it tried something new, and like, yeah, it was a flawed game. Don't get me wrong. Like, you could pretty much like exploit the game where you can max out your level like super early, but it was a good game. Like, it was challenging. Like, it experimented, and I think it did pretty well. Like, that's just my opinion, but people were like, oh, it was the worst game in the series. No, it wasn't. It absolutely was not the worst game in the series. The worst game in the series is probably Triforce Heroes.
That's one of the newer ones, right?
Yeah, it came out pretty recently. It was like, it tried to be like a successor of Four Swords, but people were like, nah, this game just like does not work.
Man, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was because I didn't have any friends growing up, but I just didn't feel like the Four Swords was that great.
Never played it.
Yeah, I think I can't remember 100%. I think you could beat it by yourself, but I think like it was easier when you played with friends. And it's like, well, as a kid growing up who doesn't have friends, like, thanks Nintendo. Way to remind me of my loneliness. But with that being said, we're running on like our last minute here, so what do you got anything else you want to say about either Christian Media or the Legend of Zelda stuff?
Definitely, if you've never played Legend of Zelda and you're interested, absolutely go play some of them. They're great. I think most of the games, even the older ones, hold up really well today.
They really do.
But I would say start with Ocarina of Time. And
well, that game constantly tops like best games of all times list. I see.
Yeah, it's not my favorite game in this series, but it is a good game. And like, if you want to play Majora's Mask, you need to play Ocarina first.
Yeah, for it to all make sense.
Or if you don't have means to play it, like if you have a Switch, definitely play Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is fantastic. It's a little long. It's very long.
Depending on how you want to play it.
Yeah, you could technically beat the game in like 20 minutes, although you're going to have a heck of a time if you try.
And yet there are people that do. Can't believe it.
They use a lot of glitches to speedrun, though.
Yeah.
But definitely play Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's a really good game. Even if you don't like Legend of Zelda, like, it's just a great game overall.
Neat.
But, yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say, really.
All right. Well, next time we decide to sit down for a fun episode, prepare to help us try and sort out the Legend of Zelda timeline, and let's see if we can actually do that in a decent amount of time. I tend to doubt it.
Probably not.
All right, then. If you want to get in contact with us, use the comment section down in the YouTube feed. If you want to tell us how terrible we are because we don't enjoy most Christian media, go ahead and yell at us for it. It's totally okay. Undeserving Gmail or Undeservingpodcast at gmail.com. We're on Facebook and the Instagram. And so if you want to get in contact with us, those are the best ways. Comments, concerns, prayer requests, anything like that, send them our way. So until next time, I'm Josh.
I'm Bryan.
Go find some good media to watch, and have a great day. Oh hey, you guys stuck around a little longer. Hope you liked that episode. Let's say there's a random box somewhere over here. Or maybe let's say Woody raises his arm and points somewhere over this way. Say you click on one of those videos and watch more Undeserving Podcast. We'll be waiting for you guys.